My proposal from Japan in 1995, I proposed quantitative easing, a new monetary policy for a post-banking crisis situation and recession. And I recommended two steps. I call it QE1 and QE2. So QE1 was the very immediate and simple measure that, of course, the cause of the banking crisis is non-performing assets in the banking system. And it is kind of silly to allow a whole country to go into recession and have large-scale unemployment and dislocation just because some banks have a bit of an accounting problem. I mean, does that make sense? Well, these accounting problems can be solved, and that can be done very easily if the central bank purchases the non-performing assets of banks at face value. Problem solved. Cost to the taxpayer, zero. Cost to society, zero. So you can solve the non-performing asset problem in the banking system at zero cost at any time. And that was my first proposal. The central bank should do that. Buy the non-performing assets from banks. Keep it on the central bank balance sheet. Forget about it. Problem solved. But in Japan, the problem was so big. I mean, non-performing assets in the early 90s, when I was warning about that it will become a problem, and I was the only voice. Everyone else was saying, oh no, it's great, buy Japanese stocks. I was saying they're going to go bust since 91, been warning that. And then I've been making these estimates. The estimate was 25% of assets are non-performing, incipient assets, of course not officially announced, but the official story was different. So because it's so large, even when the central bank takes away those non-performing assets, you would still find that the bankers will be risk averse and will not increase lending. So you need a second measure, and that's my QE2. And that one is a way for the central bank to plow money through the banking system into the economy. The central bank deals with banks. It doesn't normally deal directly with the economy, so it's via the banking system. And how do you do that? It is for the central bank to purchase performing assets from non-banks. So again, QE1, central bank purchases non-performing assets from banks. QE2, the central bank purchases performing assets from non-banks. When the central bank does that, and I gave the example in 95, 96, the Bank of Japan should just buy land, real estate in Tokyo from the owners. Then the owners' accounts at the banks will be credited with the amount, which forces the banks to create that money as they get the instruction from the central bank to pay that person. That's bank credit creation forced by the central bank. And then you have Bank of Japan turn it into parks. There's not enough park space in Tokyo. You get all these BOJ parks in Tokyo. Quality of life improves. You've supported the real estate market, and you've pushed a whole lot of money straight into the economy. Very effective and quick measure. Of course, you can use financial instruments, corporate bonds, which is what the Fed and the Europeans did in 2020. So that was my proposal. And I was shocked to find that this is what... So QE1 was implemented by Ben Bernanke in 2008, which is why it still took 2 years for bank credit to recover. That was exactly my analysis. That alone is great. It will make the big banks were bailed out through that. Non-performing assets bought up by the Fed. Other central banks, by the way, didn't do it, which is why their recessions lasted longer. America was the first to recover because the Fed adopted my Bernanke. It was part of these debates in the 90s when I made this proposal, and he listened carefully and adopted that, but only QE1. So in 2020, they adopted QE2. The Federal Reserve bought assets from the non-bank sector, from the corporate sector, from the economy, and therefore, and in fact, we're talking huge amounts, hundreds of billions, trillions, and sent the instruction, of course, to the banks. So the banks received reserves from the central bank and credited the sellers' accounts at the banks, which created new deposits. And that explained this massive simultaneous expansion in central bank and bank credit in March 2020. Unprecedented. Now, that's a very unusual policy. In fact, the Bank of Japan until then had even argued, we can't do this. What Professor Werner is saying is impossible. We never do this. But suddenly in March 2020, all the central banks knew exactly how to do it, and they did it. They had done it. So they can't argue, oh, it was a mistake, or oh, it was a coincidence. I mean, this is such a rare policy. Central banks do it maybe once a century. Yeah. And they all did it at the same time in March 2020. So it's very clear this is highly coordinated, came from the Fed, and it was the BlackRock plan. It was exactly what BlackRock was announcing at that conference. Of course, it had to be inflationary because you're pumping money into the economy while at the same time restricting supply, and the fiscal measures were put in place to make sure there be a lot of consumer spending, stimulus checks and so on. So
Yeah.
it was very, very clear that it had to be inflationary, unavoidable. But it was the
It was
BlackRock plan, and
inflationary because it was also demand driven because you're doing the surge, but it was also supply constriction because you bifurcated the world on the thesis
yeah,
of the Russia-Ukraine narrative as
they
well.
restricted the
So you did
supply
it from
through all
both
these
ends.
Soviet-style restriction measures that they love and increasingly implementing in Europe. All the Sovietization,
Yeah.
rationing, and so on, telling people no, you can't do this and that. Um, but how do we know this is the BlackRock plan? Well, BlackRock had said so, that it needs to be done. But I think they were not satisfied with it. And they didn't want conspiracy theories suggesting only that it could have been BlackRock that's behind this. No. In order to preempt that, the Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to implement it. So
To hide
now,
their tracks.
so now we know it was 100%. I mean, we got the smoking gun. It fits the BlackRock proposal, but they actually made sure to hire officially. You can see it, the announcement. They hired BlackRock, and the Fed logic was, well, we're central bankers. We don't dirty our fingers by dealing with non-banks. So
Yeah.
BlackRock, you guys, okay, you do that. I mean, that's a whole lot of assets to buy.
Yeah.
We give you instructions, you do it using our money. They were
Yeah.
the managers that were instructed to implement this Fed policy.